Hey, everybody, and welcome to True Crime Paranormal with the Psychic Sisters. This is Katie. I'm here with my partner in crime and sister, Kristi Brower. Hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
Oh, so good. So good. I love fall. I'm
Yeah.
so I'm so all over this weather and just awesome. We have this little tree in front of our house that turns red in the fall,
hmm
and it has started turning, so I know what that means. It's fall. I love it.
Oh, wonderful. I love that too. Yeah, we're getting some pretty good frost. Things are really leaves are starting to change and drop, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's good. Well, very good. Well, you guys, we have quite the show for you today.
Why
We've been
don't
Yeah, we've been talking about our getting ready for our cemetery tour, and we're still getting ready. That looks like it's going to happen in October.
Yep.
So we'll be doing a cemetery tour around, where we live. We live in Idaho, and we'll be in some famous places to us around Idaho. We'll, visit a cemetery. We'll visit a specific grave and share it with you guys and talk about that person's death or life or, whatever reason that we felt compelled to share it.
Mhm.
But in talking about that, we started talking about some of the more famous cemeteries around the world that
Yeah.
are famous for, all kinds of wild reasons. But we decided to do a show where we shared a bunch of cemeteries and their histories, their paranormal stuff, or, there's lots of different reasons why we chose what we did. But
Some of them. I don't know. I'm excited. This is gonna be cool.
now we need to go on a world cemetery tour. I mean,
Oh
come
my
on.
gosh.
We're going
Yeah.
to need more patrons.
We are. So if you wanna see that World Cemetery tour, go become a patron over on Patreon. You can find us, we're True Crime Paranormal over there, because it's gonna take a lot of support to be able to do that, but wouldn't it
Oh
be
my
cool?
gosh. Yeah, it would be cool. All
Mhm.
right. Well, I'm going to kick us off.
Alright, let's hear it.
And this is so wild. This is the Greyfriars Churchyard Cemetery in Edinburgh. That's terrible.
Mhm.
Scotland. That's probably not how you say that in a better Scottish brogue that I don't have, but
Ooh, this is a place I wanna go so bad. I love
oh
Scotland.
my goodness.
I want to go to Scotland. It's a big bucket list item for me.
Yes. So in 1637, in the Greyfriars Churchyard, Scots Presbyterians signed a national covenant with God and embarked on a religious crusade against the South. You guys have
Okay.
probably, if you watch Outlander, you know that there was a lot of warring that went on and a lot of crushing of spirits in Scotland
Mm. I'm
around.
curious though, did God, like, show up and sign? I mean, how do you
Right?
sign a covenant with God? Is
Right.
it like a lightning bolt out of the sky that
And why God would sign a covenant to basically commit genocide? I don't
Yeah,
know, bro. I don't
seems a
know.
little off here.
Yeah. So it led to the English Civil War and the execution of King Charles the First. But at
Wow.
any rate, within 50 years of the movement, um, what they were doing ended up being crushed by Charles the Second, and 1,200 survivors ended up imprisoned in a walled section of Greyfriars Cemetery that
Ooh,
was considered to be a prison, the Covenanters' prison,
ooh.
but they were now, yeah, anyway, they were held for months there in horrifying conditions where, they were basically just being starved to death and abused horrifically and all of the things you can imagine, right?
Mhm.
So many, many were executed just outside the cemetery wall. They were killed for absolutely no reason, you know. So, I mean, basically, and I think I kind of had this backwards thinking about, that the Covenanters were trying to defend their country against the English.
Mhm.
But at any rate, so they signed that pact with God. It seems like maybe it was a righteous one. Anyway,
Yeah.
we'll move forward. A total of 18,000 Covenanters died due to their
Oh,
belief.
wow.
They were the ones that were victims of genocide. At any rate, most were put to death by the king's advocate, George Mackenzie.
Mm.
You might have heard that name before. Again, if you watch
Mhm.
Outlander or have. an idea at all of Scottish history. But in 1691, Mackenzie was buried in Greyfriars, which is
Mm,
very, interesting considering that that's where so many of the, of the Covenanters died.
mhm.
Because of him, he died and was also buried there. Pretty interesting. But
Wow.
he was put in a great tomb, and that tomb was actually placed above an enormous underground room where thousands of bodies had been placed.
Oh, gross. So they basically buried him so that he was still above them,
Yeah,
still
he was
bossing them
buried on
around.
top of many of
Ugh,
the victims. Yeah.
yikes.
A lot of people say that his coffin moves. They also say
Mm.
that he can never find rest for the atrocities he committed.
I
Uh,
mean, in a way, he was kind of punished being, like, never being able to get away from all the people that he caused their deaths.
true, true.
Interesting. You could
Could
look at
look
that
at
in
it
more
that
than one
way.
way.
Yes. Well, once upon a time now, in 1999, a homeless man broke into George Mackenzie's tomb and broke through his tomb into the floor and opened up that space where all of those other bodies are.
Whoa.
Interesting. And he desecrated the coffin. He disturbed that hidden room. And soon after, that's when a lot of stories about Greyfriars being haunted came from. And a
Mm,
lot of people believe that he released the spirit of George Mackenzie
mm,
and that he now haunts that area. Lots of travelers who have visited there claim that they smelled a really weird, sickly sweet smell. And then many days later, after they had visited that cemetery, smelled it again right before they were attacked.
ooh.
Yeah,
Was he a diabetic?
I don't know. That's an interesting question.
Mhm.
I mean, this was
Just because that kind of smell can come
1800s.
from, type 1 diabetics particularly.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. Pretty interesting. So people have reported cold there that was painful to their flesh, which, in the ghostly world, cold,
Mm,
is an indication of paranormal activity or of spirits, the activity of spirits. So
yeah, yeah.
that's interesting. A lot of them have complained of or mentioned hearing loud, raspy breathing noises.
Mm,
Yeah. And feeling like they were always being watched. Pretty interesting.
that
Now,
is
there, you could once upon a time visit that prison yard as well as the cemetery. And that's where quite a bit of the paranormal activity was coming from, they thought was from the prison yard. And
mhm.
so they did finally lock the gates to the prison yard, but it didn't really slow down the paranormal activity. It kept going on, and it's
Well,
still,
it turns out spirits, they, can get through locked gates.
yeah,
So,
didn't matter. So
yeah.
it has now become, they now call the hauntings there the Mackenzie poltergeist.
Mm,
I mean, he was such a freaking terrible person in life. It's no big surprise that he would be a horrifying poltergeist in death, right?
right, right.
But people still claim to this day that they smell that sickly smell there. And then days later, they are attacked by something spectral and they believe it's the Mackenzie poltergeist.
Wow.
So that is a place that you may or may not want to visit, but
Right.
it is the Greyfriars Churchyard Cemetery in Scotland.
Ah, interesting. Well, when I finally get to go to Scotland, I'm going there.
Yeah, we're going to Scotland, by God.
Yes, we are.
Well, I did our ancestry and we have Scottish history,
We
so
do. So we need to go there and find
we
out about
have to go.
it. Yeah, we
Right.
do.
Yeah. All righty. Well, what you got?
I've got the Highgate Cemetery in London, England.
Ooh.
So the Highgate was first opened in 1839. It was going to become a for-profit cemetery What a terrible thing. They wanted it to be one of London's most high profile places to be buried. So it has like really beautiful funerary architecture. It's really beautiful, but the kind of the idea of the for-profit cemetery kind of, lost its appeal. And the Highgate ended up being abandoned after a while.
Okay.
Because, it kind of turns out that that's just gross as hell to think that you've got to pay extra money to be buried in the fancy cemetery. It's
Yeah.
just really bizarre. So in the 70s, it became a place where there was a lot of trespassing, people breaking in, and there were always rumors of people doing Satanism and occult activities. It was probably more like teenagers drinking beer and having sex, but
Probably. Yeah.
it always has to turn into Satanism.
Right.
But at that time, people started seeing a floating man in a Victorian suit and top hat who would glide through the cemetery. Then about that time, people started seeing a figure with burning red eyes in the cemetery, and people thought it was a vampire. And so there were actual vampire hunts going on
Oh,
to check that out, you know, to see if there really was a vampire there.
wow.
Yeah. Today there are still vampire sightings in the Highgate and around it, that where they see a man with red eyes that is somewhat, some people would describe him as having a hypnotic gaze, and
Oh,
that is the Highgate vampire. So if you ever want to, meet a vampire, just go to the Highgate Cemetery in London and you can.
I shall.
Yeah. What
Wow.
a thing, that for-profit cemeteries didn't really work
Didn't
out.
really take off. Wasn't the
So
thing.
gross. Ah,
Well,
humanity.
that's because when great uncle Edmund died, his nieces and nephews wanted all of his money. They didn't want to pay an
To put him
exorbitant
in the
price
best
to
cemetery.
bury him in the best cemetery. They didn't care.
Yeah,
Ah, that is gross. Yeah.
super gross.
All right. Well, this is the St. Louis Cemetery number 1.
Ah,
Now,
okay.
there are actually 3, but St. Louis Cemetery number 1 has quite the history of hauntings. The most famous one is Marie Laveau, the Voodoo
Mm.
Queen.
Oh, okay. Yes, I have heard of.
Now, because New Orleans water table is so high, they don't have underground burials, at
Right,
least in this area. They're all above ground. So the entire cemetery is above ground vaults and sepulchres and things like that.
right.
And so Marie Laveau, of course, is no different. But there has been a long-standing belief that if you draw 3 X's and leave her an offering on her vault and then leave her an offering, that she will grant you a wish.
Mm,
And to this day, people go to see Marie Laveau and leave her an offering so that she will grant them a wish.
wow.
And lots and lots and lots of people have reported seeing a spectral version of Marie Laveau wandering around, checking out all of her exes and, all of her exes, by meaning the marks on her, yeah, on
Not
her
all of her
tomb.
exes buried
Yeah,
there in the same
not all of
cemetery.
her exes live in Texas. No, none of that. But anyway, yeah, now people's marks and all of the offerings that people have left for her. So that is the more famous one, Marie Laveau. And there's, if you ever, want a interesting afternoon, research Marie Laveau. It's very interesting. The life she had, the lore around her, really interesting stuff. But I will let you work on that. She always wore a white turban on her head. She always wore brightly colored clothing, long skirts, and a white turban on her head. And that's how she's
Mm,
still seen in that cemetery.
mhm.
But there are a bunch of other people. Henry Vignier also. And this is a sad tale. He was a sailor that didn't really have a home to speak of until he fell in love with New Orleans. And he was living in a boarding house there. And he actually was very anxious to buy a plot in cemetery number 1. He was really worried about having all of his belongings together in case of his death. And so he had trusted the proprietor of the boarding house that he lived in because he was always going off to sea and then coming back. And he
Oh.
didn't really have a home and he didn't have a family. So he
Mhm.
trusted the proprietor to hold on to his precious papers, which partly were his plot in cemetery number one. And the proprietor had promised to do so, but he was not trustworthy. And at one
Shocker.
point, the proprietor. So once at one point, Henry was off at sea, and the proprietor sold his plot in cemetery number one off to the highest bidder. And when Henry got back from sea
I
to
think you've gotta be pretty desperate in life if that's
right,
what you're doing.
who is this guy? So he comes back from sea and he's quite ill and he dies. And he, basically all of the wealth that he had and all the paperwork that he had been stolen by the proprietor. It wasn't just the vault, it was everything else that he had as well.
Mhm.
And so he was buried there in the paupers section of the cemetery rather than in the nice vault that he had purchased for himself. But they do
Mhm.
say that he wanders around. He was blue-eyed, had striking blue eyes, and that a blue-eyed man still wanders around the vault that should have been his
Oh,
to
wow.
this day. Yeah. Yeah, and
That
there's
is
many
wild.
others. So if you're interested in a very interesting cemetery, do a little research on the New Orleans Cemetery number 1 because there's quite a
Yeah,
few other hauntings that go on there very regularly.
that is wild. I will
Mhm.
check it out.
Well, poor Henry.
I know, that's really sad.
He was trying to do his due diligence.
I guess. I mean, I it's a weird thing to be so obsessed with.
Yeah, except for that he didn't have any family. And so
Mhm.
he was just, I think, trying to, make sure that his final expenses were taken care of. But,
Sure.
some asshat ruined that for him. But,
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so
yeah,
let me tell you about my next one.
okay.
This is the Union Cemetery in Eastern Connecticut.
Okay.
So, this cemetery is about 400 years old, and it is believed to be so haunted that a lot of paranormal investigators have investigated the Union Cemetery. And there's even a book by Ed and Lorraine Warren called Graveyard on what they've found. So, the most well known spirit in this cemetery is that of a woman in white. Why is it always a woman in white? Right?
Yeah.
Um, she has been spotted on camera and with the naked eye. So,
I
lots of
think
people
it's
have seen
because
her.
the women in blue are kind of invisible.
Maybe. I don't know. It's easier to see the white ones. I don't know.
I don't know. Women in
Um,
white and men in top hats are
yes,
really
yes, men
common
in top
haunting
hats.
stories.
That
Yeah.
is so true. So she has a tendency to show up in front of oncoming cars. She likes to startle drivers and scare people. And hang on, sorry, I just lost my spot. So that's kind of her thing.
Right.
There is also someone known, and here's the other thing people always see in cemeteries: red eyes.
Yeah.
So there's a ghost in this cemetery called Red Eyes, who is very scary. The woman in white is very calm, and although she startles people by kind of startling them while they're driving,
Right.
Red
Well,
Eyes
wasn't
comes
there a
across as
woman
very
who was
scary.
hit and killed by a car near there that was
I think so.
hitchhiking and people
Yeah.
think that was her?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
But they're not totally sure, but I wanna check out the book called Graveyard because it will tell us more about the Union Cemetery, but it's definitely one where people have had many experiences and where so many people have seen the woman in white with the naked eye, and there are lots of photos of her too.
Mhm.
Very interesting.
For sure. Okay, well, are you all familiar with the Stoll Cemetery?
No.
If you have ever watched or did watch, it just barely wrapped up, but, Supernatural, there,
Oh, yeah, yeah, okay.
the Stoll Cemetery and actually wasn't filmed at the cemetery, but the name Stoll and the, idea of the Stoll Cemetery was, where this big reckoning happened at some point in the show in Supernatural, but at
Oh.
any rate, this cemetery has all kinds of, bad energy. First of all, there is the ruins of a church next door, or kind of, the cemetery is, attached to the church.
Mhm.
The church was built because there had been a local pastor who was stabbed to death in his barn by an unknown assailant. And
Mm,
after that, there was a bunch of scary paranormal stuff going on in this town in the 1800s. And so they chose to build a church out of the barn. So they used the barn as the basis to build this little church in his honor, trying to bring God back to the area because it seemed as though, you know, things shit had gotten real there, right? Well, the church eventually was abandoned and
mm,
fell into ruins, as did most of the Stoll Cemetery. Most of the graves there are extremely old,
mm,
but there is a lot of lore there that this is where Satan walks.
mm.
There are lots of stories about
Does he have red eyes? Because if so, I think he's in a couple of other cemeteries too.
I don't know about red eyes, but there is also a tall pine tree that split a headstone from the from the 1800s.
Oh, wow.
There are lots of rumors that that tree in the early 1900s was a place where witches were hung.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, thrill seekers come and visit this cemetery in droves, and they come around Halloween. Even though it's actually been proven that some of the urban legends, there's an urban legend that on the Halloween night that there is a staircase that opens up in the Stoll Cemetery, and if you find it and walk down it, you'll walk directly into hell.
Cool.
And it's
Hard
now,
pass.
yeah, it's now been proven that that was an urban legend that was created by a professor at a local college in the 70s just to scare his students, and people believed it.
Sounds about right.
So it seems as though no, there might not be a stairway to hell there after all, but there
Well, good.
is a lot of bad energy around it. And people that visit this place claim to see all kinds of spectral stuff. They feel things, they smell a weird sulfuric kind of smell,
Mm.
and feel like they're being grabbed by their ankles. So
Wow.
visit the Stoll Cemetery or definitely don't. I don't even want to go there, but
I don't know. Sounds pretty cool. I'm not taking the
Yeah.
stairs, but other than that,
It's
I
in
may.
Kansas, by the way. I don't know if I made that clear. It's
Oh,
actually
it's
in
in Kansas. Okay.
Kansas. Yeah. Yeah. So there you go, the Stoll Cemetery.
Cool. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me move you a ways out of Kansas to the Ayama Cemetery in Tokyo, Japan. Now, this is, interestingly, it is kind of in the middle of the city, and it's really famous for its beautiful cherry blossoms in the spring. And so it's not necessarily a place you'd initially feel like might be uh, haunted, but it is actually the very first public cemetery in Japan. So it's been
Okay.
around a long time.
Yes.
And there are a lot of famous people buried here, but one of the really famous graves here is of Hachiko, who is a dog. Hachiko, where he waited dutifully every day for 9 years for his master after he died, who would never return. So he
Wow.
has a memorial statue in this cemetery. There are a bunch of stories that come out of this cemetery that are really interesting. One of them is the ghost taxis. So local taxi drivers report people hailing passengers hailing a taxi. They get in, they say they want to go to the Ayama Cemetery or Ayama Cemetery, but when they arrive, there's no one in the back seat,
Ooh.
and that's been reported many times.
Mhm.
It's
Wow.
also reported that people see a group of samurai warriors who haunt
Oh,
this cemetery,
wow.
and these warriors died before they were able to honor their family name. So, because they are refusing to die in shame, their souls remain cursed to guard the Ayama Cemetery until their honor can be restored.
Wow.
So, very interesting. It would be an interesting place to visit.
Yeah, definitely.
The ghost taxis, that cracks me up.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Are the taxi drivers like, Jesus, again?
Again,
Well, here's another fare I'm not collecting
right?
because the dead never pay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And they
pretty much.
definitely don't tip.
Yeah, no tips, nothing.
That's interesting. Okay. Well, I'm going to tell you about the Old Western Burial Ground. Now,
Mm,
by that name, you might think this is out west.
right?
Nay, nay.
Mm.
This is in Maryland.
Oh, well, is it in Western Maryland?
I'm assuming so. It's also known as the Presbyterian Churchyard.
Mm,
It is nestled just below Westminster Hall.
okay.
This is the burial place of the one and only Edgar Allan Poe.
Ooh, okay. I'm in already.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And Edgar Allan Poe, we could do a whole show on his life and death, but
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
his death was actually unexplained.
Yep. Still
And
unexplained.
a lot of people think that he committed suicide, but he actually did not, or there's no proof that he did.
No.
But
But he had syphilis and he was a heavy drinker and there was a lot of stuff wrong with him.
yeah, yeah, he wasn't particularly, healthy. But
No.
after he died on the date of his death, for many, many, many years, people reported seeing a figure all in black with a veiled face placing one red rose on his grave. That
Oh,
went on up into the 90s,
maybe it was Annabelle Lee.
and then it stopped.
Oh,
Perhaps.
really?
Yeah. But a lot of people claim to see a spectral Edgar Allan Poe wandering around that cemetery at various times of the evening and dusk hours.
You
And
would think of all people, he would definitely be a ghost.
right.
That would definitely be like game plan.
Yeah. Definitely be doing some haunting. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So, people do, but they have also, for many years thought that person all in black coming to put the rose down maybe was actually an apparition as well. But
Mhm.
at any rate, it seems that no one ever really knew who he was or who that person was. Sorry, everyone knew who Poe was, but anyway.
Right.
But there's something else in this cemetery that is really, really interesting. It is
Mm,
the Skull of Cambridge.
mm.
So, the Skull of Cambridge, the lore is that it's buried in this graveyard. The Skull of Cambridge was the decapitated head of a murdered minister
Oh, wow.
back in the 1800s. And the head never quit screaming.
Oh, yikes.
So, so they say when they found the body, its mouth was wide open, the head severed from the body, but the mouth of the head was wide open and was shrieking. And that they were unable to make it stop and finally actually encapsulated the skull in a slab of cement to try to shut it up. But visitors, and then they buried it here in this cemetery. It
Mhm.
is said that people still to this day sometimes hear disembodied shrieking and screaming in that cemetery, and they believe it is coming from the skull of Cambridge. It
Wow.
screams at all times of the day and night. And some people have been so severely frightened by hearing that screaming that they required psychiatric care.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
Wow.
apparently it's some scary stuff.
That sounds like it.
That is one mad minister.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Though I've tried to get more information on who he was, why he got murdered, like what? Nothing.
Mm. Hmm.
Maybe a better researcher than me can find it. But as of late, I have no reason why that happens, but or who he was. But
Yeah. Oh, that's super
anyway,
interesting, though. I would love to go see Edgar Allan Poe's grave. Holy cow.
yeah. Yeah.
Bring it on.
And then just maybe you'll hear the Skull of Cambridge. Give that a
Maybe.
big yelp. Yeah.
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 Wow.
Pretty interesting. All right.
Okay. Well, next I have Lanoria Cemetery, and Lanoria is in Chile, the country of Chile.
Mhm.
It was founded in 1872 in one of Chile's most notorious mining towns. So this is a place that has a really dark history of forced labor and slavery. So in the 1960s, the mining business had kind of settled down, and the town was left abandoned by the living. But many of the graves in that cemetery were left open and the remains of the deceased left visible for all to see. I
Ooh,
think it was a threat. So, like, they had this forced labor and slavery, so they'd leave these graves open so that people could see, like, this is what's gonna happen to you if you don't, you know, fall in line and keep digging. Really scary. It's believed that the dead rise from their graves every night.
mhm.
People hear disembodied voices and screams and sounds of footsteps when no one is around. That's kind of on the north side of the town. On the south side of the town, people see spirits wandering the streets. And local residents of the nearby towns are so terrified that they will not step foot in Lanoria day or night. And so it really is always empty except for tourists because the locals will not go anywhere near this place.
Wow.
I know, really interesting. Kind of makes me want to go there.
I know. Me too. Me too. I know. Most of the ones that are like, definitely don't come here, I'm like, oh, I'm coming.
Oh yeah, I'll be right over.
With bells on, I'm on my way. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Like if the locals are scared of this place, I'll be right there.
Except for the Stoll Cemetery. That one just doesn't draw to me at all. But
Oh,
most of them, hells yes.
yeah, just very interesting. But the way that people were killed there, and then the way they left their
Yeah.
graves open so that they could
Oof.
see their bodies decomposing, and kind of like, hey, you better fall in line, or this is going to be you. You know,
That is so
horrible,
gross
just
and
horrifying.
scary. Yeah, that is horrifying.
Yeah.
Totally. Ugh. Hmm. All right. Well, my last one to present is in Ireland.
Ooh.
This is the Mount Jerome Cemetery in Dublin. And it's actually a very cool cemetery that is full of statuary and graves. And it's one of those ones that you would want more than one day,
Wow.
to be able to make it through the whole thing. It's absolutely
Mhm.
stunning. But the cool thing or the interesting thing here is there was a man named William Weir who had a dog that was his pride and joy named Caesar.
Oh.
And he left his clothes on the beach and went swimming off the coast of Wicklow. And Caesar sat with his clothes, and Weir never came back. He drowned.
Oh boy.
And his body finally did wash up. But for days, Caesar stood on those clothes, refusing to move from that spot.
Oh.
And eventually, his body did surface. He was one of the more wealthy people that lived there. And so his family, they did bury him in a vault there. And they put a carved stone dog on top of it for Caesar. Caesar actually died shortly after Weir did.
Oh wow. Poor
He wouldn't,
Caesar.
yeah, he wouldn't eat, he wouldn't drink. He basically just died of a broken heart.
Mhm.
So when they placed this monument, they placed a carving of the dog there on top of his tomb. Anyway, people have been reporting from the time that was placed to now that they frequently see this dog running around the cemetery,
Wow.
especially in the evenings, just running around, spending time around Weir's grave or his tomb, and also just kind of frolicking around through there. That lots of people have had encounters with Caesar just chilling in the cemetery.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
cool.
Hmm.
That's
There are
very cool.
lots of other reports of hauntings in this cemetery as well, but frankly, I felt like Caesar deserved to take the stage.
Right?
Yeah.
Very interesting. Poor little Caesar.
Yeah. Poor guy. Died of a broken heart.
Yeah.
Yeah. All righty. Well, have you got
Well,
one more for us?
I have got a humdinger for you.
Okay.
A humdinger. This is Lake Lanier in Georgia. Now, you may be wondering why I'm talking about a lake when we're talking about haunted cemeteries. But let me tell you, Lake Lanier is a man made lake.
I'm
Didn't
hating
used to
where
be a
this is going. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, didn't used to be a lake. It is in North Georgia, 60 miles from Atlanta, and it has 600 miles of shoreline. It's huge. Okay, so basically, when they went to make this lake, they had to move all these towns and they had to supposedly move all these cemeteries. Although it has now been discovered and a lot of those cemeteries did not get moved. The
Mm.
government in the state government in Georgia said that they were going to move all of the cemeteries, move all the bodies, so
Mhm.
that they would be not covered by the lake. But divers have discovered fully intact cemeteries under the water, like
Oh.
headstones with like stone flower pots next to them. I mean, all the stuff that you would see in a
Mhm.
cemetery
Yeah.
under the water. Divers have found them.
Oh my god.
So they didn't move a huge number of these bodies. Now, here's the thing with Lake Lanier. Lake Lanier really likes to kill people. So people do think that it is haunted. One of the reasons that they think it is haunted is that Lake Lanier has a really high accidental death rate in the state of Georgia, like way higher than any other body of water there.
Mhm.
And I was trying to find the number of people that have been killed there. It's tons, it's hundreds and hundreds of people that have been
Mhm.
killed in
Wow.
this lake.
Well,
And 675 people have died in the lake, and not all of their bodies have been found.
wow, how convenient.
Right? How convenient, right? Now,
There's
this
a
is the thing.
cemetery downstairs. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're just automatically buried. It's so weird, and people have been really angry finding out that that not all the cemeteries were moved because they just lied to people's families
Right.
and didn't. They did move some of them, but they didn't move them all. Um,
Wow.
yeah. So it's a really famous place. People go there recreationally a lot,
Mhm.
but some people won't go anywhere near it because of this. It
Mhm.
was built in 1957 by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and it was created to manage navigation and flood control from the Chattahoochee River and to supply water for residents of the city of Atlanta. So, you know,
Ew.
I know, yeah,
Oh my
that's the other
god.
part here. All those bodies, I really wondered, like, have they tested like the levels of formaldehyde and stuff like that in the water? It makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Mhm.
It took 5 years to fill the lake up to its intended water level. And the government had to purchase 50,000 acres of farmland to build it, which displaced 250 families, 15 businesses, and relocated supposedly 20 cemeteries along with their corpses in the process. Except that they didn't. They didn't relocate a lot of them. They're there.
That
They're
is
there. Their monuments are there.
horrifying.
Everything is there under the water.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Yeah, and people have all kinds of people get killed on Lake Lanier at a much higher rate than other bodies of water in Georgia. And people have all kinds of experiences with ghosts on the shores of the lake. That is um, a very common experience for people to see people on the lake on the shores of the lake that aren't really there. And there's a lot of that. Some people say that they in the water they sometimes will feel an arm or a leg that doesn't move. Ah, yeah,
That seems like your worst nightmare.
yeah, 100%.
When we were kids,
Yeah,
we couldn't go swimming in any lake anywhere that Christy wasn't certain that she was about to step on a dead body
I know.
or that
I've
a
always
shark
had
was
that fear.
going to
Isn't that
attack
weird?
her. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Even
Scared to
though
death of dead bodies in the water and sharks.
And full disclosure, never experienced a dead body in the water or a shark,
Nope.
but terrified of both. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Ugh.
but people say that they feel things, they see things. There are stories about people who were killed in the lake who, seem to haunt the shore of the lake where they were killed.
Mhm.
Really, there's tons and tons of stories about Lake
Wow.
Lanier, but there's been a lot of research being done on Lake Lanier recently
Mhm.
that's really bringing to light the fact that they really didn't do what they said they were going to do. And I mean,
It's
under the water, there
so
are like,
horrifying to think that they would just do that.
yeah, yeah, I know, it's
Oh,
terrible.
yeah. So are they being sued, like, right and left?
No, I mean, it was so long ago. It was in '57, so it was a really long time ago, and so, you're talking about several generations from the people who were supposedly buried there, but
That is something.
it is,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, but I actually watched a documentary about Lake Lanier, and there's footage
Mhm.
of people diving underneath and have video footage of the cemeteries that are still under there
Mhm.
and their headstones and monuments and stuff, and you can't tell me they moved the bodies and left the monuments. Why would they do that? They
Right.
didn't. They just
No.
didn't move anything.
No.
And maybe they did move some of them, but they didn't move them all.
Well, I mean, if you're moving the body, you should also be required to move the monument,
Right.
so their families could find them.
Know where their
Yeah.
family members are. Yeah. Yeah, you would think. So, it is a
Mm,
very interesting place, but it is people have all kinds of supernatural experiences there, and
yeah.
then just all the deaths, all the drownings on the water where bodies are not ever found, and
Oh,
it's
that's just really terrible. Yeah.
it's this is a place I don't want to go. I'm good.
Yeah.
I don't need to visit Lake Lanier.
Yeah. Probably not gonna be diving, and definitely not gonna be diving.
I
And
know.
also, I wouldn't go to Lake Lanier. I would not if I lived in Georgia, I would not recreate on Lake Lanier. Not because of fear of death, but maybe a little, but mostly out of principle, you know?
Yeah,
Be like, "No, you take that lake and shove it, because 'cause I'm not
yeah,
even
yeah,
even
after
buying
doing
in."
that to this community.
Yeah.
Well, and that the footage of the divers finding, the headstones under the water, it is the most eerie thing I've ever seen. That's the scariest cemetery I have ever seen,
Yeah.
is
Especially
what
because
that
it was
was.
done on purpose.
Yeah.
I mean, there are cemeteries, throughout history that have been found that were, natural disasters, or,
Right.
reasons,
But this
but
was intentional.
this was intentional. That is just unthinkable.
Well,
Wow.
you think about if these were the cemeteries where the poor people were buried,
Yep.
and they just didn't care. I would be willing to bet that it's something like that.
Yeah. Well, especially because this was rural,
Yeah.
right? So this was just
Yeah,
these are
farm
farming communities,
yep,
and
farming communities in Georgia. Yeah, it's awful.
but if you're drinking the water in Atlanta,
Ding, ding,
maybe
ding.
don't.
You might wanna get a filter. I'm just saying.
Yikes. Whew. Alrighty. Well, that's what we've got for
Yeah.
haunted cemeteries across the world. There's so many more, but
Oh, yeah.
those were some that jumped out at us as ones that you guys might want to hear about and that we wanted to learn more about too. So, of course, our cemetery tour will be coming in October. So that will hopefully this will stave you off for a minute, but
Yeah.
not me. I'm diving right back in, but
Mhm. I know, it's really
anyway.
interesting stuff.
Yeah. So we'll be back likely Wednesday night with a live. That's kind of become our tradition lately, is doing a live
Mhm.
stream on Wednesdays. And we're live streaming now from YouTube, from True Crime Paranormal on YouTube and True Crime Paranormal on Facebook. So you can find us
Yep.
either way. That's a fun time to come. If there's lots of, movement in some of the cases that we're covering, we'll report on that. If there's not, we'll just bring a case.
Yep.
So that's what we're doing. And of course, we're on Patreon, True Crime Paranormal. If you want to support our efforts there, we appreciate it. Please like, comment, share if you feel drawn. Those things help us a lot. And mostly just come play with us. We just love
Yeah,
having you guys here. This is,
we sure do.
we're just having a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yes, we are.
Yeah. All righty. Well, you guys take care. Have a good day, night, evening, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Don't go to Lake Lanier. And
Yeah, no. Drink the water in Atlanta.
don't do those things. You'll thank us. Anyway, guys, this has been True Crime Paranormal with the Psychic Sisters. Have a good day.
Bye.